crossfire is what they're calling him now, perhaps a first since the October 7th attack. Israeli citizens who had been in support of their prime minister are now against him. Benjamin Netanyahu is fighting two wars, the war against Hamas and the opposition from his own people. Thousands of people gathered on the streets of Tel Aviv after 6 hostages were found dead in Gaza. Hersh Goldberg-Polin, Eden Yerushalmi, Ori Danino, Almog Sarusi, Alex Lobanov and Carmel Gat had all survived almost a year as hostages. When their bodies were discovered in a tunnel in southern Gaza, many Israelis blamed Netanyahu for their deaths, saying they would be alive if the Prime Minister had agreed to a ceasefire, freeing them. The 6 deaths have brought out a deep rift within the Israeli society, those who prefer to continue this war and those who believe the state first has a moral duty to bring back people who were kidnapped from their bedrooms, Nova Music Festival or their workplaces. Protesters are demanding a ceasefire deal soon, but many say that if that happens, Netanyahu's government might fall. America, meanwhile, has urged for a ceasefire as well. In fact, US President Joe Biden spoke with one of the victims, Hersh's parents. They had appeared at the Democratic National Convention last month. So what is going on and where does fate move for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Let's try and understand this more. On the broadcast, I'm joined by Colonel Miri Eisin. He's a former international media advisor of the Israeli Prime Minister and senior fellow at International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. I'm also joined by Shreya Upadhyaya, foreign policy expert. Good evening, namaskar to both of you. Miri, I'd like to start with you. These scenes have been unprecedented since Sunday. Thousands of people coming on the streets of Tel Aviv and protesting, demanding for a ceasefire soon. But the question is Prime Minister Netanyahu listening to the people of Israel?
We're supposed to be hearing him in his voice in the next 2 hours, which is already an exception. He has not done many press conferences, and when he does them, usually he comes with a statement and allows very limited questions. I, as an Israeli right now, need to hear him. I am heartbroken and angry. The Prime Minister, in that sense, has not expressed what I've just said right now. I need to hear that he's heartbroken too. He's making decisions. He's not a dictator. He doesn't get to make them on his own. It's something broader than that. And we need to hear that he's listening to all of Israelis and not just to his political base, and that at the end, running a war which is for the better of Israel and not for him to be reelected. And these are very challenging times because, as I said, we're both heartbroken and angry.
I absolutely understand. I think Israel has been going through a tough time. And now with 6 hostages being found dead, it is only increasing the sorrows of the people and the anger and the frustration. Shreya Upadhyaya, how do you see this really? Domestic pressure clearly increasing for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There is a ceasefire deal that has to happen. It has not been happening. The talks keep failing. Where do you see this really leading for the Prime Minister?
Good evening, Shreya, and thank you for having me. I think Israel, although it has this external appearance as a nation that is very brave and it faces a lot of adversity, but domestically, if you look, it's an incredibly divided house. And even before the October 7 attacks, Prime Minister was facing certain scrutiny at home. He was not very popular. There were regular protests against of his policies, including his judicial plan. Then October 7 comes, it gives him a lifeline, but not everybody has been rallying around him. There are certain challenges, and now the main issue here is with the current hostage negotiation deal is whether Israel retains the right after exchange of hostages to hit back at Hamas. Now, one of the key demands on Hamas's side is when we resolve this issue for once and all. When we do the complete exchanges of, all the hostages, there will be no more war. And Bibi Netanyahu says that, we would like to continue attacking Hamas. We want to finish off Hamas. Now, Hamas is not going to sign on its own death warrant after releasing hostages, even without exchange of hostages, with so many hostages in their captivity. You have already seen that 41,000 people now are dead. Gaza has paid a lot of price. Now, if they give a free run to Netanyahu after return exchanges, he would go at all lengths to do whatever damage he can do. So that is one aspect where a larger question is also tied not only of what to do after Hamas's leadership, but also who governs Gaza. Does
Hmm.
do you allow Gaza to
Yeah.
be run Hamas and regroup it and regrow it, or some other international arrangement, or does Israel take over? That is a question. So these are some of the very complicated questions that are there. And one last point I would like to say that the deal has not happened
Yeah.
is perhaps Netanyahu is buying time because right now the American elections are 50-50. If Kamala Harris comes, she will more or less continue with Biden's policy or even be pushing more and railing his America's international ally to close in. But if Trump come, he might have a very different kind of attitude, and perhaps Netanyahu is waiting for American elections to see which way the war can be taken.
Sure. Okay, a couple of significant points that you've made, Chirayu Thakkar. Let me take this across to Miri. Miri, do you want to respond to the fact that, a lot of people see this as Netanyahu delaying the ceasefire deal, of Prime Minister Netanyahu, not agreeing to the fact that Israel will not strike Hamas even if there is a ceasefire deal and the hostages are returned. And that is two of the most important conditions that Hamas has put forward: lasting ceasefire deal for the hostages to come back and for Israeli soldiers to withdraw from the border.
We're talking about a war that was started by Hamas by, as we all know, both massacring 1,200 Israelis and taking all of those hostages from their homes, as you said at the beginning, and holding them for the last 11 months. And I agree with some of what was said before, but when I focus on it, it isn't that there's a yes-no answer to your question. It depends on how you look at things. How can I, as an Israeli, have something like Hamas? They already did October 7th. They planned it. And we have all seen over the last 11 months that we understand now that Hamas was planning this for a very long time. It didn't start with the judicial unrest and with the protests against Netanyahu. It started before, by the way. Netanyahu was prime minister then as well. So how you run the war, how you do negotiations,
Maybe I
there is
absolutely
no...
understand what you're saying, but this is also, remember, coming at the cost of the lives of your own citizens. Israeli
Exactly.
citizens, Israeli hostages are being killed.
And that's why, as I look at it from my point of view, I want Israel, a democracy. It's not a dictatorship. The Netanyahu doesn't get to decide in that sense on behalf of all of us. He's supposed to be doing this with his government. And at this stage, what's happening is that the members of his government represent a portion of Israelis that, for me, I'm saying from my point of view, do not represent me for sure. In that sense, what they're saying is fight until the end. Hamas has to be destroyed. And if I right now, as a terror expert, somebody who looks at terrorism, I look at that and I say, what am I telling Hamas? That they have no way out? Of course, what did they do? They executed hostages literally when they were going to be found by Israel rather than give them up. And we cannot allow that. Our moral fiber of our country will fall apart. And Netanyahu cannot only listen to his coalition government that represent portions of Israel, he has to listen to all of us. And right now, I absolutely am one of those in Israel that say, I don't believe Hamas. I don't want them to exist afterwards. But for me as an Israeli, I need to know that the government is willing to take harsh steps to get back these people alive. Afterwards, let's deal with that afterwards. But if we don't do what we can, our moral fiber is being hurt. I strongly believe in this. And I think that the demonstration that came out of Israel yesterday and today, having been here, having been part of it, this is something that's coming deep within. I started by saying I'm heartbroken and I'm angry. And the only thing I can do in a democracy is go out and demonstrate, go out and protest. And I want this prime minister to listen to us, not to stand there and only represent his political base. That's not what you do in Israel right now.
Right. And talking harsh steps, Miri. There are several media reports in Israel that suggest that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not in favor, or at least not focusing largely on getting back the hostages as much as he's doing to win the war. And this is one of the Israeli news channels that quotes Defense Minister Gallant, who said that they had a meeting and Prime Minister Netanyahu said that keeping Israeli soldiers along the Gazan border with Egypt, which is also known as the Philadelphia Corridor, was more important than saving the lives of the remaining hostages in Gaza. How do you see that? When your own Prime Minister is more focused on, not the hostages, but rather winning the war?
So it's that sense of everybody presenting this as being either or. You can either sit at the Philadelphia corridor or you can get the hostages back. And we're talking about diplomacy. We're negotiating with a hardcore terror organization. This isn't something easy. To my point of view, you can up from the Philadelphia corridor that will have challenges. For example, if we're not on the Philadelphia corridor, Hamas have the opportunity to be able to, for example, smuggle hostages and the leadership of Hamas out of the Gaza Strip via Egypt, who knows to where. So I understand that there are military considerations on both sides, and at the end you make hard decisions. And the fact that it's being presented right now in the either or is because for me right now, it's after Hamas they executed 6 hostages that we know are alive on Thursday. It's only Monday today. They were alive, they were executed, so that right now, I want those Israelis to come home. Because for me, otherwise, as I said before, the military consideration that I accepted is not as the same as bringing back the faces of those who are still alive. Because you keep showing those who were executed, those who were killed on Saturday, right before they were found. And I want us to bring back those that are still alive, the faces of young women, young men in their 20s, in their 30s, a family. They need to come back.
Okay. Chidayu Thakkar, how do you see the world really responding to the war right now? America time and again has been called out for its, hypocrisy in both the wars, whether it's Israel, Hamas or Russia, Ukraine, for, saying that one should stop the war, but at the same time supplying with the kind of arms and weaponry that is required. You just had the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy just a few months back announce that UK will halt some arms sales to Israel. So domestic pressure as well as probably pressure from across the world to now, find a long-term lasting solution to this war, to end this war?
Shreya, I think you rightly pointed out, especially in English-speaking democracies, US and its allies, there are real tensions between supporters of Israel and people who oppose the war. With the American election looming large, especially in states like Michigan, where there is substantial Muslim population, Biden is really struggling to send a message that he is doing enough. Uh, Make sure that the Palestinians are not suffering. On the other hand, he is able to keep the Jews within the US happy about the hostage deal and the rate of execution. Moreover, Hamas is also a very shrewd political player. With these executions, and as the colonel was saying a minute ago, that 4 days ago people were alive. These people were deliberately executed to not only give a signal about impatience, but also to rake up the public sentiment on streets. And they were very successful. What we are seeing right now is happening. And this public sentiment is not only rallying on the streets of Tel Aviv, but also rallying in all major parts of the world where this war is followed largely, especially where there is Palestinian or Muslim activism on streets and where the public opinion is organized. So I think the window is closing for Netanyahu. He can't drag on forever. He just has to see and as I said, there are 2 or 3 major things. First is American election. He just has to see that if the winds are blowing strongly in favor of Trump, I think he will not give up no matter how great the demonstrations are, because then he knows that he has an ally in the wings and who will come on the scene and do whatever he wants to do. So that is one major point. Second, how Iran plays its card is also very important. In at least in my understanding, after the killing of Yahya.
All right, there seems to be a network issue there with Shreya Upadhyaya, but as we reconnect him, let me go across to Colonel Miri. Colonel Miri, Shreya mentioned how the US presidential elections is something that the world is closely watching, specifically Israel must be watching. What's the general sentiment? What's the general feeling? We just had a few weeks back, Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed that session of the US Congress. There was standing ovation, multiple standing ovations that were given. There were families of hostages who shared their ordeal. But for now, that presidential election being a crucial event that will unfold in November, which will impact the Hamas war as well.
One of the things that I always want to point out is that Israel does not want to be a partisan issue. We want to be a bipartisan issue. We don't want it to be either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, because it's changed over the years. And sadly, I want to say that certainly in as far as Prime Minister Netanyahu has felt in the past, he did not have a good relationship with the Democratic president, President Obama. He had a very close relationship with President Trump. He did not have a great relationship, he, the Prime Minister, with President Biden. And I think in that sense that, as you said, he, the Prime Minister of Israel, would very much like President Trump to win again. We, Israel, do not define United States elections. Those elections are about U.S. issues, and one of them that has come in this time is also in the foreign policy, the aspect of the war against Hamas in Gaza. I have no doubt whatsoever that in Israel, what we need is a strong, United States, and that the challenge of the polarization there, especially it's both because of Israel, does not help anybody. You mentioned before, and as the foreign expert was saying so correctly, that for the first time we have today that the UK is going to do some arm limitations on what they'll sell to Israel. Israel needs our allies. We cannot stand alone. We stand with the United States no matter who's elected, with the UK, France, the EU. We cannot afford to stand alone. And we're a very small country, and we are in a multi-front war. As we're talking right now, Shreya, and this is so important to remember, it's not just the hostages, it's not just the Gaza Strip, it's not just what's happening in that arena. As we speak today, Hezbollah continues to fire against Israel, into our communities. That's up north with Lebanon. So that for us, that U.S. election is not just about the war against Hamas and the Gaza Strip. It's about that overall support, not just military, in this broad area, because we're in a multi-front war.
And therefore, Colonel Miri, let me ask you my last question before I wrap this discussion up. What is the long-term solution? If there is bloodshed on both sides, if there is a war that both the sides are fighting and nobody wants to withdraw, where does this end? What's the long-term solution?
So Shreya, how about you and I sit down and we discuss that at length, because at the end, I feel that, yes, we do need a change of government in Israel, because right now what we're being offered is war or nothing, and that really disturbs me. Having said that, I, Miri, who live in Israel, cannot think of living here when there's a Hamas to my south and a Hezbollah to my north. And here I feel that the world does not call them out enough. We are not the problem. We're part of being here. We need to call out these terror organizations and sideline them. Have people understand that they are changing the way we look at the world.
All right. We'll leave it there. Colonel Miri and Shreya Upadhyaya, thank you very much to the both of you for joining us on Global and sharing your perspective. Thank you very much.